Good afternoon to you. Well, after the Judicial Service Commission interviews last week, you may remember them, there have been several suggestions that that constitutional body should be changed. There are all sorts of suggestions flying around. The number of politicians should be limited, for example. Some people say they should be removed entirely. Some people are making other suggestions. You'll have seen the criticism of what happened during the interviews for the position of Chief Justice last week. They recommended in the end that Supreme Court of Appeal Judge President Mandisa Maya be appointed. Well, Chelsea Ramsden's senior legal researcher at the Helen Suzman Foundation. Chelsea, good afternoon to you. Firstly, do you believe that the problems we've seen last week, and many people think there were problems, were they because of the structure of the Commission or the people currently sitting on the Commission?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I do think that the problem is twofold, and it is both Commission and the structure of the Commission, as well as some of the people that were on the Commission. The structure of the Commission is a 23-body Commission. It is large. These people that are sitting on them and representing their bodies are loud-spoken, very opinionated, and obviously looking out for the interests of their mostly political parties. The Helen Suzman Foundation last year did actually make a submission to Parliament recommending an amendment to the Constitution to decrease the number of politicians on the body, which would ultimately decrease the number of people that sit on the body as well. And this would actually be in line with the National Development Plan as well.
So I understand the idea. I mean, nobody likes politicians at the moment. I mean, some of us vote for them, some of us don't. But the Constitution is also quite clear that there needs to be a certain number of opposition party MPs on the panel. Now, if you lower the number of politicians on the panel, don't you reduce the voice of opposition parties? And isn't this actually a problem? Because it would seem to me correct that there should be that the Justice Minister should be on the panel. That makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that the President should have 1 or 2 appointments as well. That also makes sense to me. I understand the idea of reducing the number of MPs, but you have to make sure that democracy is felt, that people actually do feel represented and are represented. And don't we do that through elected representatives?
Yes, completely. And we wouldn't even make the suggestion that a politician should be removed in its entirety. We do believe that they have a role to play on the Commission, especially as the elected body. However, there are ways to reduce that number. I mean, if it's 6 in the National Assembly, we could reduce it to 4 with 2 majority and 2 opposing. If it is in the National Council of Provinces, potentially 3, 1 from each. These are solutions that, I mean, obviously would need to be considered, and any amendment to the Constitution should not be taken lightly. So that would have to be something that there would need to be opinions on. Although, I mean, the Constitution was approved during the certification of the Constitution by the Constitutional Court, they just said that they couldn't make that decision or comment on the amounts of politicians on the basis that that falls within the policy and legislative area of Parliament. So Parliament is fully capable of decreasing the number whilst ensuring that there is still representation on the body.
Do you think there should be more people from the legal profession, more judges than politicians? I mean, do you have a sense of where the balance should lie?
Well, I do think there should potentially be some more judges, maybe even retired judges on the board, on the body, should I say. I think the problem with an overabundance of politicians is that politicians don't necessarily know what a judge does on a day-to-day basis. They don't know what it takes to make these decisions, the kind of characteristics that a judge would need beyond and above their independence, but their knowledge that they need, their work ethic, the budget. We've seen the budget being a problem generally. So all these things are with an abundance of politicians and them choosing, basically dictating who the JSC appoints. The bit of the problem comes in is that if you don't really know what the job is that you're appointing for, can you really make an informed decision?
I mean, it's a really interesting debate because on the one side, I mean, I can understand people who say, let's reduce the voice of politicians. I can understand people who might say, well, let's have more judges on the panel. But that also allows judges who are on the Commission now to kind of retain their ideology among other judges, if you see what I mean. They'll be able to perpetuate what they believe now. So it's quite an interesting debate. There's quite a lot of tension, actually. Should there be more people from the legal sorority, or should they, in fact, be more politicians?
That is, I mean, it's a very interesting debate and something, if any changes would have to be made, would be looked into quite closely. I think we could look at international best practice and what their standards dictate. In terms of international best practice, there is many places that have a lot less politicians or even sometimes no politicians on board. The best practice dictates that there should be a higher percentage of the judiciary. But in terms of that, it's not so much even just the members that are on the board sometimes, but the transparency around the process in its entirety. How are the chosen members appointed? How does the profession choose the members that represent them? There is very little information out there in that regard, and that could also help with understanding and accepting that the members that are on the board are there for a good purpose.
People who propose changes, as the Helen Suzman Foundations do, will have several examples. I presume that you will point to. I don't want to speak for you, but you can point to what happened in these last interviews. But what happened last week wasn't the first time we've had problems. The interviews last year had to be rerun simply because KSAC went to court and said, we're going to challenge the outcome because they were run so badly, and the JSE agreed. So when a body agrees it's done a bad job, you know there's a problem. But let me sort of make two suggestions that before we do changes, should we not try two other things? The one might be, and with all respect to the last few chairs, a firmer chair. I think whoever's the next Chief Justice, if it is Judge Meyer or whoever, is likely to be firmer than we've seen. The other issue is that we would possibly at some point need to develop this debate around whether we need criteria or not. The criteria are not particularly clear. Would clearer criteria make a difference?
Yes, definitely. I think that you're not entirely unfair to say that the chairs lately have been a bit underwhelming in terms of controlling their commission. Unfortunately, Acting President Petse let a few things go on for way too long and should have been a lot firmer, stepped in, and that has happened in the past before. Criteria, in the same submission that we made to reduce the size in the JSE, we requested that the Constitution be amended to include that there needs to be criteria as well. We do understand that the criteria can change from time to time, so as long as there is criteria that is published before interviews or before nominations are even held, that would be the criteria for that round of the interviews. That provides for a lot more objective reasoning and understanding in terms of the questions that are asked, and it helps with the weighing up process.
I mean, criteria, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because sometimes someone comes along who fits all the criteria, but nobody likes.
Well, criteria doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be in a ranked order, that all the boxes have to be ticked for that. I think it was Judge President Mlamba actually who answered at one point in response to the question of whether South Africa is ready for the next for the first female Chief Justice, was that every position that opens, particularly when it is up in these high offices and that, will require different things at different times. So if that box or that criteria, if you tick 5 of the 4 or whatever it is, but that position requires a strong, firm person or really independent with the high level of integrity that all the colleagues look up to at that point in time, then maybe that person is the more preferable one to say someone who ticks all the criterion boxes. I mean, it's just something that would have to be looked at, and I do agree that it needs to be fluid enough as well.
Am I right? It would need a change to the Constitution. Does that mean we need a 2/3 majority in both Houses of Parliament, or does it mean that a simple majority would do it?
No, we would need a 2/3 majority. Sorry, if I'm correct. Suddenly my constitutional law knowledge seems to be there. It would require a special majority to change the Constitution. Which means that
on the maths at the moment you'd probably need the ANC and the DA to agree. I mean, it's possible, but it may not happen.
Yeah, I mean, the chances, we do realize with some of the submissions and that we have made, that it can be a little bit far-fetched in the political arena that things are in now, but it doesn't mean that these things should still not be discussed and brought to light.
Chelsea Ramsden, thanks very much indeed. Really do appreciate it. A senior legal researcher at the Helen Suzman Foundation. I'm almost certain it's not the last debate we're going to have on the structure of the Judicial Service Commission over the next month or two.